I get there, I want to quickly give you a bird's eye view of how to approach any subject or how to deal with a topic. And I'm sharing this as a scientist, as a researcher, something I learned through the years, and even more so predominantly during my PhD days ages ago, and also now as the National President Life Skills for the Women's Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, where we are ourselves in the process of creating a robust policy for the benefit of lakhs and lakhs of women professionals in our country. These learnings were very basic, but solid. And I think these may just help the audience today. So I'm just going to share it regardless before I move to the actual topic. The skill of critical thinking and creative thinking, and then going on to critical writing. These are very fundamental elements, not only in academic writing, but in any rational or constructive writing. So when we're talking about thinking critically, we are talking of the ability to analyze information and experience, formulate ideas, derive conclusions, ask pertinent questions, and present logical arguments. When you do a root cause analysis, through your questions, it becomes easy to identify the actual cause of the problem, and then you can address the issue better. And when you ask questions within the group, don't worry about what the other person will think or say or not like, etc., etc. This is the space for open, factual, and rational deliberation. So move between the heart and the head. Don't worry too much. Just allocate the duties. For starters, let's say, let your heart throw the questions. And believe me, when you do that, lots of pain is going to emerge from there. For example, your heart may say, I cannot see poor 10 or 12-year-old starved children begging on the street. Don't they deserve a good life and education? What can I do to make a difference? Or let's say the pandemic has created havoc in the world. And apart from health challenges, there are so many people without jobs today. What's going wrong? And how do we correct this? And questions like this, right? So when the heart is in motion, it's going to come up with all of the things that actually touch the chord right in. Once that's done, now let the head think about the answers based on data available, on factual information, and rational discussions. You're obviously going to see a mix of both, your head and your heart through and through, but just bear in mind which one of the two gets to be more dominant and at what point in time. Right, so that's the first thing. Also, don't be afraid to ask questions to the status quo, because innovative thinking actually begins right there when you start questioning the status quo. Another important aspect is openness and humility of not knowing things. It's okay to not know, but it's not okay to stop being curious to know the answers. So ask questions, no matter how small your doubt is. Once you have some answers, some facts and figures, some information or data, and have rationalized it, now you move into the creative thinking space, which is primarily the ability to depart from traditional ways of thinking, resulting in generation of original and innovative ideas that enable us to respond adaptively to life situations. When you look at resolving an issue or a problem, think through the situation as a process to be resolved through maybe a number of steps or even micro steps. So what you do is that when you start refining your points, you choose a course of action from a number of options, which may result in the specific outcome that you want to achieve, which means that you have critically analyzed every aspect of the issue. And lastly, my personal opinion is on the language used. Keep it simple and precise. Effective communication happens when we have the ability to express our ideas and thoughts, in this case in written, which is simple to understand, is complete in content, and where the intent is made clear. So now let's talk about the theme, a more prosperous future. Prosperity, the word, that itself can be defined in many ways, like how success can be. For some, prosperity is money. For some, it is fame. For some, it could be good health. For some, it could be great human relationships, and so on and so forth. But when we talk of a prosperous future as a community, as mankind, the lens through which we see this becomes a little tinted, okay? So there are global issues we are all passionate about, we passionately feel for, and we believe that if those issues are resolved, we would have a prosperous future. Two such issues that both hemispheres see are education and unemployment, which is even more rampant in the pandemic era. We are all aware of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, and Global Goal 4 is quality education, which demonstrates that it is a crucial aspect of our lives. It is the harbinger of world peace, as well as a catalyst in sustainable development. The right to education has been defined in Article 26 of the United Declaration of Human Rights, with the declaration calling for free and compulsory elementary education. Furthermore, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, adopted in 1989, states that countries shall make higher education accessible to all. I recall the Nobel Peace Laureate Malala Yousafzai once said, "One child, one teacher, one book, and one pen can change the world." Also, Nelson Mandela rightly called education the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Today, in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic, one witnesses an unprecedented disruption in education and learning on a global scale, affecting more than 1.6 billion students over 190 countries. And that's why, understandably, the International Day of Education this year was celebrated under the theme Recover and Revitalize Education for the COVID-19 Generation, with the goal to increase collaboration and international solidarity, to place education and lifelong learning at the center of global recovery, while also transforming towards a more inclusive, safe, and of course, a sustainable society. Education must celebrate learning in all contexts and encourage the sharing of innovations that fulfill the potential of every learner, no matter what their circumstances. I strongly believe that education is the key to sustainable development. We must ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Education is a very powerful tool which can aid people out of poverty and provide them with promising futures. Despite this, about 265 million people, especially children and adolescents across the world, do not have the opportunity to enter or complete a school. This is a violation of their human right to education. The world cannot afford a generation of children and young people who lack the skills they need that they need to compete in the 21st century scenario or this economy. And nor can we afford to leave behind an entire, race, in fact, half of humanity behind, right? Additionally, the lack of inclusive quality education hinders countries from achieving gender equality and breaking the cycle of poverty, which leaves millions of children, youth and adults beyond and behind. All people have rights, no matter who they are, where they live, what language they speak, what their religion is, what they think, what they look like, what their gender identity is, whether they have a disability or not, whether they are rich or poor, and no matter who their parents or families are or what their parents and families believe they or do. No person on Mother Earth should be withheld from the basic right of education for any reason. And governments must do whatever it takes to make sure that every citizen in their countries can enjoy all the rights they deserve. We must understand that education can break or reverse cycles of intergenerational poverty. Studies have shown that if all the girls and boys complete secondary education, 420 million people could be lifted out of poverty. Education should help individuals to fully develop their personality, their talents, their abilities. It should teach them to understand their own rights and to respect other people's rights, cultures, and differences. It should help them to live peacefully and protect the environment they live in. Let me share some interesting facts that emerged out of research and studies a while ago on higher education when I was going past. This is a couple of years ago. It hasn't changed hugely, but maybe some parts have changed. And how it impacts employability. Higher education in India suffers from numerous universal insufficiencies, with the net result that it continues to make available graduates that are unemployable, even though there is a humongous demand for skilled manpower. The rigid academic structures, insufficient infrastructure and facilities, sizable vacancies in faculty positions and poor faculty, outdated teaching methods, disinterested and unmotivated students, overloaded classrooms, widespread geographic, income, and gender and ethnic imbalances, the rusting independence of academic institutions, and what have you. These are some of the known problems of the Indian higher education system. We must understand that education is believed to be a dynamic phenomenon that recognizes the changes in the environment, responds to new demands, and keeps developing with the society of which it is a part. Possessions of relevant knowledge, creation of new knowledge, and capacity for its application have become determinants in the strength of a nation today. Education has come to center stage and is today the most important instrument for transformation, for advancement, and for development. NEP 2020 is here, as we all know, and it's up for some reckoning as part of your entire exercise. You know, the best way to actually enhance or improve yourself is through introspection, through self-evaluation, by critiquing your own work or your own creation. In the same way, when you examine the policy, please do approach it with hard-hitting questions of actually whether it is delivering what it promised to deliver. So let me give you some food for thought. Questions like, let's say, is the policy helping to create more thinkers? Are we moving away from rote learning? Apart from cognitive skills, are we encouraging students to develop their affective and psychomotor faculties? Is the policy going to make more students employable? Are we creating entrepreneurial mindsets? Is the policy actually inclusive? Is it actually equal education for all? And so on and so forth. Continual evaluation and assessments with zero biases and open feedback will help us evolve with better systems and policies. There is no debating that in a globalized economy, the proficiency and competence of manpower have to meet global standards, and thus curriculum and syllabi have to meet national needs and global challenges. We have to prioritize education, absolutely, and prioritize it as a public good. We have to support it with cooperation, partnerships, and funding, and recognize that leaving no one behind starts with education. I think I've given enough food for thought to get you all cracking. So let me close my talk with one of my quotes that I recently shared on social media. While change is the only constant, constructive disruption is the new norm of today. Keep altering your thinking hat to be that incredible disruptor. Thank you very much, and God bless.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your insightful words. And I'm sure the participants here are surely feeling extremely inspired by your speech and the knowledge that you shared with us today. I would now like to move on and invite Mr. Arpit Chaturvedi to take the floor and tell us more about the theme, A More Secure Future.
Thank you so much, Yashba, and the whole of the ASEAN Youth Organization. It was absolutely a pleasure when I heard that I've been invited to speak at this forum. I think youth all over the world, and youth especially in the ASEAN region, has a great role to play in the future of humanity. I am absolutely thrilled and inspired by what Dr. Uppal has said, and I would want to start my remarks from where Dr. Uppal has left us with a lot of food for thought. You must have come across the expression that future is not what it used to be. What do we mean by that? What we exactly mean by that is that the future, as we used to perceive it earlier, as a static dynamic, as a static force, as something that is predictable, is no longer like that. With new technologies disrupting the way that we organize life, with pandemics, with climate change, with a lot of these changes that we are seeing right now, you cannot extrapolate what's going to happen in the future based on what's happened in the past. Okay. Now, the theme that I'm going to be talking about is a secure future. And what do we mean by being secure? How do, for example, science perceive security? And for science, as per research on various species and organisms, security essentially means one thing. There's been a lot of debate on what security is, what survival of a species literally means. And what it literally means is adaptability. You can do a lot of different things in the world, but then as long as you're not adapting to the needs of reality, you will not be able to survive. Now, what do I mean by that? This holds true for human beings. This holds true for the fishes, the birds, the animals that we see around ourselves. Adaptability has kept us surviving. There's something called, it's a weird word to use, but then there's something called reality bias. And what do we mean by reality bias is that we have a bias that we understand reality as it is. I took up this course in systems thinking while I was at Cornell, and Dr. Derek and Dr. Laura Cabrera, husband and wife teaching this course, would always start with this whole discussion around mental models versus reality. What do we mean by that is that we typically have a vision. We don't experience reality directly. We typically have a vision of what the real world is, and we interpret reality through our mental models. It's almost a lens that we put on in our brains to interpret and understand what reality exactly is around us. And what reality is around us, interestingly, keeps changing with our own actions, with actions of other agents, other human beings, other animals, other organisms, and so many gazillion things that are happening in the universe. The nature of reality keeps changing. But we have a little psychological disadvantage over here, that once we form an opinion, once we form a mental model about reality, it is extremely, extremely hard for us to update our mental models of what reality is. Whenever you jump to a conclusion about a policy or about a real problem that you're thinking, research has shown that when you create a mental model in your head, or when you jump to a conclusion in your head with limited data, it is increasingly difficult and costlier for you to update your mental models when new data comes to light. So the way that we've been doing our education, the way that we've been doing our economics, the way that we've been organizing our workforce is based on a particular perception of reality, wherein the perception remains the same, but the reality has changed. I talk to a lot of people in the public policy circles about how the civil services, especially in a country like India, has remained static where the needs of the country has changed. How the education system in a country is still road-based, while the needs of the education system, as Dr. Uppal has rightly pointed out, changed, and the need of the hour is to have a more cross-disciplinary, more flexible, more skill-based education system, while we are still stuck on the rote-based methodology of the past century. So the easiest way to not survive is to not adapt. And how do you ensure that you are adapting all the time? The way that you know that you're adapting all the time is that you keep checking in with reality. There should almost be a constant feedback loop between what your mental model is and what reality is. And every day you should wake up looking for clues on how reality has changed, because reality changes gradually. It changes, in places where you're not probably looking at, you're not probably noticing. The change is initially gradual, but then it comes on to the fore quite suddenly. So every day when we wake up, we should look at how reality is changing. We all saw Coursera and a ton of other e-learning platforms emerging nearly half a decade back. But who knew that this peripheral trend would become the core of education today, just about 5 to 6 years since these have been in place? So something which was a peripheral trend in education becomes the core way in which we are conducting education today, which is online. Now, people who were able to catch on to that reality, they were able to survive and adapt. And other people who were not able to catch on to that mental model of reality, they were not. So look at the peripheral trends that you see in your society, in your workforce, in your economics, in your technology, and know that these peripheral trends, however small that they are right now, will become the core of what you will be working with and dealing with day in and day out in the future. So what's periphery will become core. Now, let me give you another non-human example to explain how mental models shape reality and how we need to keep updating our mental models for a safe and secure future. Let me take the example of flocks of birds. You've seen flocks of birds who fly in the sky, and there have been generations and generations of scientists trying to understand that how do these flocks of birds survive? How do these flocks of birds lead the direction? And what they understand is that there is no one leader in that flock of birds. There is no, alpha bird who's leading the whole of the flock. It is essentially what's happening locally. There are three underlying rules that each bird in that flock is following, and these are very local rules on which the whole system of this flock works. And that's, if you understand that each system has certain underlying rules, then you start understanding what the system is. So you look at the flocks of birds, they are operating on rule number one, is that if people around me are going left, then I should go left. If the birds around me are going right, I should go right. So essentially, I need to follow what people, in my immediate locality, immediate surroundings are doing. The birds who are on the periphery just need to adjust as per the wind pressures, the wind directions, and the general direction sense that all of the birds have. The third is that if there is a predator who's coming in, split apart and come back together. Okay. Just these three very simple rules give you all of the marvelous patterns and all of the complex behaviors that you see in this flocks of birds turning and going in different directions in the sky. Now, if you look at the recent history, or you even observe your recent surroundings, you would realize that we don't see so many birds around our localities as we would earlier. And why is that happening? Because in the mental models of the birds, these were the only three rules that mattered. What happened was that the world changed a little. The environment in the world brought forth, because of human beings, all of these telephone lines, all of the telephonic signals, all of the radio waves that kind of mess with the fundamental signals and direction sensing capabilities of the birds. So the mental model of the birds was based on these three simple rules. The world in itself changed in a particular direction, and now you are in a world where your signals are no longer credible, and you as a species, if you are a bird, you are not able to adapt your mental model to the reality, to the new reality that has emerged. Okay, and when you are not able to adapt to the new reality that has emerged, there are extinctions. And if we are talking about a safe future for the youth, this is a good example to remember that you would have a mental model of your thumb rules of what the reality is and those rules to survive in the world. But the world is going to change, and so should your rules. So that's the first segment of my conversation. The second segment over here is what do you need really, in very practical terms, to survive and to have a really secure future. Now, typically, what you need are three things. Number one is a lot of exposure to great networks. And that was the reason we also started a fellowship at our think tank called the Global Policy, Diplomacy, and Sustainability Fellowship. You guys should check it out. It's also called the GPODS Fellowship. And the idea over there is to bring youth from all across the world together and have them mentored by, let's say, an Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, or a grassroots NGO worker, or a Fortune 500 CEO, or a minister. And the idea over there is that when you're exposed to so many different mental models of people coming from diverse walks of life, you are able to update your own mental models and bring those closer to reality. And you catch on to some of the peripheral trends, which will become central to reality later on. The second thing that you need is knowledge. And while exposure gives you, the ability to adapt your mental models, knowledge gives you the depth of understanding where the trends of the future are going. And when I'm talking about knowledge, I'm not necessarily talking about theoretical or pedantic knowledge. First of all, the lines between theory and practical application are blurred now, and they are blurring even more so as we move into the future. It's important to understand that a good theory which does not work on the ground is not good theory in the first place. So knowledge, when I'm talking about, that in itself will be changing. That in itself is in dynamic evolution, and that in itself needs to be perceived in a manner which is useful, which is practical. Theory opens up a lot of opportunities for you to think in many ways, but practical thinking is what really works on the ground. And you need to develop theory in a way that things are operational on the ground. It's really, really important to think about theory and practicality as part of the same continuum and as not disjoint with each other. The third thing that you need to survive today, so far, while knowledge will help you survive in the long run, exposure will help you survive in the long run, what helps you be secure in the short run right now would be skills, and those would be transferable skills. When we were setting up this fellowship that I was talking about, we conducted a number of discussions at the World Economic Forum and a number of focus group discussions and roundtables at the World Economic Forum at Davos. This was pre-COVID. And what we realized was that there are certain skills that governments, business leaders, NGO leaders, bureaucrats, they think are important today, and they think are going to be even more important tomorrow as we go forward into the future. And what are these skills? When we came up with the results of all of these discussions, skill number one was effective writing and communication. And how can you communicate and put your complex mental models in a very simple, understandable, digestible, and persuasive manner? And right now, the consistent answer from all of these leaders was that not enough people have the right communication and writing skills in the industry, and this will be needed even greatly, even more in the future. The second thing that came up was critical thinking and complex problem solving, because we are living in a world where you have complex, dynamically changing parts in a system. As I said, that the future is not what it used to be. The reality keeps changing every time. So all of the problems that we are looking at, whether it's the problem of climate change, whether it's the problem of global terrorism, whether it's the problem of skill development, all of it, these are complex adaptive problems. You try to change one part of it, but the other things adjust accordingly, and the whole system still remains at a status quo. It's important to be able to solve complex adaptive problems, or what are called wicked problems. And how do you do that? You do that by thinking really deeply about certain problems and identifying the underlying rules that create all of this complexity beneath the system. So complex problem solving is another skill. Fundraising is a third skill, whether you're in the private sector, whether you're in the social sector, whether you're somewhere in between, you would have to be involved in a fundraising capacity at some point of your career or the other. really, really important for us to learn for fundraising. Then thinking in terms of circular economy was another skill that, all of the business models of the future, all of the work practices, and even the way that we do our education and lead our daily lives will have to be modeled around a zero net zero, sort of a agenda, which means that there should be nothing that really goes to waste. One person's waste should be another person's resource, and that sort of a thinking in itself is a skill when you talk about circular economy, when you talk about waste management, all of that. So that essentially means that utilizing your resources that you are endowed with to the fullest, and not generating minimal waste out of your activities. So thinking in circular economic terms is also a skill. And finally, effective program design and evaluation is a very, very important skill that will be even more important going into the future. Again, whether agnostic to whether you're working in the private sector, public sector, civil society, etc., etc. So as a fellowship, as a think tank, through GPODs, we try to inculcate these skills, and we try to educate, universities all across the world on how do you make your own curriculum and your own, learning models more adaptable and more secure for the future. Because I absolutely agree with the earlier speaker that now education is one of the most fundamental tools of development as well as security into the future. Now, my final thoughts on this matter is that what are the rules to live by in life? And the rules to live by in life is that you should pursue knowledge, but you should not be pedantic. Okay. You should pursue power because power gives you the agency to do things and get things done. But you should never be coercive. You should pursue resources or wealth as we commonly understand it, but you should never be profligate. Don't be wasteful with it. Okay. And don't be unjust in the means of acquiring the wealth. And you should look at and pursue service. Service is a great source of good. It's a great source of power, but do not be servile. And these are, knowledge without being pedantic, power without being coercive, wealth without being profligate, and service without being servile is a fine balance and, fine meta rules that you need to live by. Now, two more quick parting thoughts. How do you skill yourself in the future? So obviously you must pursue all of these skills on effective writing, fundraising, etc., etc. But think about meta skills. And when I talk about meta skills, it's about learnability. So which means that, today, if you know a particular language, let's say you're a Spanish teacher, or, you're a coder and you can code in a particular language, it's not important for you to be a good coder or to know a particular language. The skill really is that do you know how to learn new languages quickly? That's the real skill. It's a meta skill. Because we are moving in a world now. Earlier, decades back, I remember when I was still in my high school, we got a couple from NASA who was visiting us, and they talked about how super specialization is going to be the way forward for success in the future. Now the world has changed. This was in 2007. Today, we are living in a world where more and more people are talking about cultivating generalists, because if you are specializing in a particular field, in a particular niche of an industry, the whole of the industry could vanish tomorrow with the technological developments that are happening. So you need to have meta skills, transferable skills that would quickly pull you out of one industry and make you deployable in another. So what's important over here is that you need to be deep generalists, which means that you need to know a lot about many different things and probably extremely, well about one particular thing. So you can have one or a couple of areas of specializations, but you must still be, interoperable, and you must still be able to operate in various different scenarios. So Being a generalist today is better career advice than being a specialist. However, that's how things are today. Maybe 10 years down the line, specialization might come back. But from the world as it looks today, being a generalist is a lot more important. Uh, final thought that we talked about these four things: knowledge, power, wealth, and service. These are four fundamental resources of power. So, political power, knowledge, wealth, and service. Four fundamental resources of power. And I, a lot of times, come across students and people who tell me that, I don't have so much money, so how can I make a difference in the world? Or I don't come from, this or that political background. How can I bring about a social change? Now, the thing is that you don't need to have, nobody really has it. Nobody really has it, because think of, and let me give you, three very quick examples. Think of how a researcher develops knowledge. So if I'm a PhD scholar, how do I develop knowledge? I would interview 10,000 people who are in front of me. I would take samples. So let's say if I'm interviewing my PhDs on youth leadership, I would interview people in the room that, okay, what youth leadership is about. I would pool that information that I get from you, structure it, and publish it in a paper, which becomes knowledge. So where was that knowledge really residing? Where was that information residing? It was residing with you. I merely pooled it, I structured it, and I produced knowledge. Okay. How do wealthy people, they derive wealth? If you're an Uber, etc., then, the wealth really lies with the people. You are just pooling their resources. You're structuring them either in a factory or in an Uber sort of a model. And you are then, selling it out into the market. And that's how you become a wealthy person. And finally, politics and power. Who has the vote? Who has the real power? It is the people. But you pool their power together, you structure it in different ways, you create a system of parts and subparts and relate different groups with each other, and you pool that, you structure that, and you generate political power out of that. So the unit of power lies with the people. So nobody really has power or has wealth or has knowledge. It's about how you harness the resources that are already out there. So that's it from my side, and I hope this was useful.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable insight and your knowledgeable words. Your practical and personal insight is extremely helpful for us to understand this theme better. And I'm sure our participants have a lot more to learn from you in the coming days as well. I would now like to invite Ms. Tarana Farooqui to share her views on the theme, A Fairer Future.
Hi, everyone. Am I audible? I just wanted to check before I start.
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I think both the speakers had so much to offer and so much to say. So I feel like I should have not gone in the end. And this is like a perpetual problem in any panel discussions or any conferences. But thank you so much for having me here. I think I'm really excited and looking forward to the 2 days of policy sessions and engagements that we're going to have. When I was told to ask to talk about a fairer future and sort of talk about structural violence and peace, etc., the first thing that came to my mind was the situation that's currently happening in Afghanistan. I think that's one thing that I'm sure everybody knows about it. I don't need to tell you the details and tell you the grave reality that people are suffering, but that really made me think, what are we doing? Like, where are we headed in the future, right? I mean, in the morning, I saw in the news about this US Army soldier being killed in the airport attacks and the entire chaos that's sort of going around it, and about these US drone strikes happening and things like that. And I'm sure everybody knows about what's happening. It's all over the news, right? So that really makes me question a lot of existing systems at place, right? A lot of power dynamics that are at place and the future sort of going ahead. Because I mean, I'm no expert in Afghanistan. I'm no person to tell you, okay, this is what has to be done, but it just breaks my heart, right? It just breaks me to see what's happening. And people like us try to do change, right? We try to be advocates of change and talk about it and stuff, but we sort of have a very limited capacity to do that, right? So I think that's where I would like to start and talk about the entire concept of fairness and how we're kind of placing ourselves. Because a lot of these concepts that we talked about are evolving over time, right? They're all kind of changing, and we need to adapt ourselves according to those situations. So I mean most of you might know that I've been working with refugees and migrants for a while now, and I've been working with Afghan refugees who are based in South Asia. So I mean that's precisely why I think I'm more emotionally and like intellectually attached to this issue, because I've always been working with marginalized and vulnerable communities, and communities who sort of are sort of at the peripheries of any power systems or any systems for that matter. So I think that's where I come from. And just to sort of give you my little insights into the workings of refugee communities or migrant communities as such, I mean, they go through a lot of challenging situations, right? For example, the refugees who are based in India don't have access to bank accounts and don't have like Aadhaar cards or any legal documents which allow them further access to systems and institutions, right? So for example, if a refugee is not keeping well, so going to a hospital or going to a doctor itself it's a very painstaking process for a minor cold cough kind of a situation, for example. And not just for refugees, a lot of like informal sector population itself, this is a big challenge, right? And just accessing basic resources, amenities, education, etc. becomes challenging, even though there are like schemes at place and things like that. A lot of them don't even know about it. So for example, very recently I've been working on this campaign at my workplace on COVID vaccine hesitancy amongst the rural population, right? Which again, a lot of people know that there is a huge gap in rural communities versus urban communities accessing vaccines. And also there's a big stereotypes and discrimination and stigma attached to it, right? Like people think, oh, you still have COVID after getting a second shot as well. Or, what if I die? What happens to my family? What happens to, what will happen? Who will, because they work as daily wage workers, right? So what will happen that one day? Who will take care of my kids, right? So there's so much going on. And then that also kind of makes you realize the kind of privilege that you're at. I mean, it's fairly easy for us to talk about these issues, right? And at the same time, to reach out to that kind of target audience or that kind of population becomes challenging, right? Because these stereotypes and stigmas are evolving over time, right? It's not a one-day solution. There's no fixed one formula that you say that, okay, this is how COVID vaccine hesitancy will get over in rural areas. Even in urban areas, a lot of people living in slum areas, for instance, and migrant populations, etc., are going through this problem. So I think that's the kind of challenges and situations we are dealing with currently, and we can try to think about solutions to them, and we can try to look into systematic problems and institutions. But at the same time, I think the biggest issue that lacks in today's policy, the world of policy making, so to say, is to understand the target audience and their needs, right? To have their voice in it. Like, I mean, you would barely hear about, let's say, somebody from the LGBTQI community participating in decision-making processes that are meant for them, right? Or let's say somebody coming from a Dalit community, talking about being in those consultations and discussions that are talking, like, catering their issues and needs and challenges. So I think that's the biggest challenge, because there is a lot of power dynamics and there are a lot of systems that are in place, right, which sort of don't allow you access to those spaces and those kind of structures. I think that's where we are at, and that's the biggest challenge that us are facing. Like I mean, we can talk about it, but I mean the bigger issue is to get them access to those opportunities and making them understand the importance of such the need to do that, right? And the power of the democracies, right? The power of institutions that exist. I mean, fair, you can question institutions and challenge them, and the institutions need to evolve over time, right? Looking at current needs and current challenges that the country faces. But at the same time, the value that it holds and the power that it has, I think that is what goes missing, right? Like fundamental things like the constitution, right? I mean, we barely know, I mean, the importance or value of those kind of those kind of principles or documents that sort of formulate any policy or anything for that matter, right? So that's what I just thought I'll give you a context about what's happening and sort of what I'm feeling currently. And I'm sure a lot of us in the room are going through that kind of turmoil in their heads, right? Like looking at the news, and it's disheartening, right? And we were sitting here at home. I mean, we can't do much, right? We can probably share on our social media or do some volunteer work or do fundraising or something like that. But it's harsh when it happens to you and to your families. Like last week I was interacting with a couple of refugees who were on protest, and they were all crying, right? Their hearts came out looking at what's happening, and they're stuck here in India because they want to sort of go to the West and try to get resettlement there, but their accounts are stuck, right? Like their paperwork is stuck right now. So it's a very disheartening situation. And I mean, we're all trying our level best, right? We're trying as much as we can do, but it's not easy. It's definitely not easy to work with marginalized communities or vulnerable communities, because people aren't able to understand their needs itself in the first place, and they aren't able to articulate those as well. It's not easy. So that's where people like us come into the picture, right? Like that's where people like us become like the advocates of change, right? Or representing their voices. But at the same time, we need to ensure that we don't misrepresent those voices, and ensure that the exact reality is sort of portrayed, right? So I'll sort of probably talk about 4 things that came into my head, and then probably I'll jump into the concept of structural violence and peace, and sort of the kind of things I thought I will talk about. And I mean, since a lot of you have questions around peace, conflict, violence, and things like that, so I'll probably try to demystify those questions and how you can sort of use them in policy making, and the kind of work that you would be doing in the next 1.5 days. So there were 4 values or 4 ideas that I always keep in mind when I'm like working on a policy document, or when I'm formulating policies, or when I'm working on an advocacy campaign. I think first is about equality. I think that's the most core fundamental aspect when you're trying to make a fairer system or a fairer policy, right? I mean, besides making a more equitable and secure system, it's important to have equality as a core value. Also social justice, right? To ensure that justice prevails irrespective, and fairness is prevalent, right, in any aspect, so that if there's a dispute, you have mechanisms to redress or to find ways to deal with those issues, right? Because our societies are bound by conflict, our societies are bound by violence. It is not something that you can get rid of, but yes, you can have mechanisms and systems to reduce it or to mediate those conflict situations, right? So I think that's where the main core lies, that us as humans, us as a society, need to build an inclusive society, right? We need to build a society that is not just inclusive of vulnerable, marginalized group, but also have systems where you can address challenges, right? Where you can address issues. If there's no systems in place, who will question systems, right? Who will tackle systems if you don't have them and people don't know if they exist? Like, then what is the point, right? Then everything is all fair and everything is like a utopia situation, which is not true, right? Like we all know there are so many challenges. And in a country like India, right, which is so diverse, like every 1 kilometer you go and you see the diversity, right? Whether it is language, culture, religion, caste, gender, it just is complex. Like that's precisely why countries like India and South Asia sort of called as a continent in itself, right? Because there's so much diversity, but that diversity is beautiful, right? It gives us rich culture and heritage, but at the same time, it makes it complex for policymakers to deal with the challenges that we face, right? I mean, which country in the world has the kind of issues that we have? Very few countries in the world would probably talk about these kind of issues, right? And I think the entire current pandemic situation taught us that how we need to readapt ourselves, right? Like how we need to reassess these things that we were doing in the past, and how our healthcare and education system was at a weak situation, right? And I mean, pre the COVID pandemic as well, and the need to readapt it, right? And the need to counter that to this global pandemic. And like, for example, what Arpit mentioned about the adapting to the needs of the reality and, the mental model that he said, I think that's very true. I completely agree with you, because otherwise you won't survive, right? I mean, the entire notion is about survival of the fittest. Otherwise, I don't know if there is one way to, survive this situation and at the same time prosper, right? And have growth and development. Otherwise, I don't know how we can tackle these situations, right? So that would be my second. The other is about inclusivity and diversity, which I also mentioned about having marginalized communities to have a voice and have a say in discourse and in discussions, and it might be formal conversations, it might be informal conversations, but feeding in what they have, what their say is, right? Because they are the stakeholders, they are the beneficiaries who these policies are being made for, right? Otherwise it's just a paper document in a government office and that's about it. Like, it won't make sense, right? You might have, I'm sure we all know there are tons of these policies that are in place, but nobody cares, right? Like, nobody knows their value that exists. And I mean, people like us can try, right? People like us can talk about these issues, but at the end of the day, it's about the beneficiary, right? Otherwise, what is the point of having a policy? I mean, it'll just be on your CV as a government official that, okay, I made this policy, I'm responsible for this district. But unless you don't even know people in your district, like, what is the whole point, right? So for example, I used to interact with a lot of government officials and a lot of very high senior level people, and very respectable people coming from those backgrounds, and they don't even know the location of their constituency. Like, they don't even know the people there. And I was surprised, I was just like, are you kidding me? Because that really hits you, that they have power, right? They have the position and the control, and they can do a lot, right? But I mean, lack of will or whatever, there's so many reasons to look into it, but they probably don't know what exactly is the problem, and that how will you come up with solutions, right, if you don't know the problem. So I think it's a simple math, right? If 1 + 1 makes 2, but unless you don't know those 1 and 1, how will you solve that problem, right? You might come with amazing ideas and solutions, very innovative things, but unless you don't know where the systematic issue lies, I really don't know where we are sort of heading, right? And it's young people like us who can actually do that, right? Because I mean, no offense to anybody or anything, but I don't know where the next generations would head, right? I think we need to really include that when young people are having conversations, to be aware and to have data driven policies, right? Like, to have policies which are based on evidence, like based on facts, and not on something that is imagined by people like a few years, a few decades ago. Because it really shatters me that I don't know where things are heading with the current systems at place, right? So I think that would be my third point about inclusivity and policy making. The last point, I think, is on sustainability and the entire SDG 2030 agenda and things that we keep talking about, which I'm sure most of you know, is to build policies that are sustainable in nature, right? Which are long lasting and not having a shortcut formula to it. And that's what the United Nations 2030 agenda also talks about, right? To have a transformative steps which urgently have the need to shift the world on set of a sustainable and resilient path, right? I think that's what is important, to have a more holistic approach in that sense, and to build that kind of environment and build that kind of spaces where you can have these kind of conversations, and at the same time being inclusive in those conversations. I mean, that's precisely why we moved from the MDGs to the SDGs, right? To have a more wider perspective to them, and also tackling existing challenges like climate change, for example, or in energy crisis, for instance, right? I think that's where things kind of lie missing. You have SDGs at place, but you really don't need to understand how you can locally implement it at a national level or at a state level, grassroots level particularly, right? I think that's why we need to really look into issues. And because I work with very vulnerable and marginalized groups, I know how challenging it becomes, like just to explain to them these concepts and to sort of put it in their heads that these things have value, right? Like, for example, when I'm talking about gender violence, when I'm talking to women who are like, who are abused at home, for example, I mean, they don't really get the point of doing these workshops, so they don't really understand the sense behind it. But when they do, they realize that, yes, it makes sense. At least they know who to address, right? Like how to file a FIR, for instance, if a husband is abusing you, or if an alcoholic husband is hitting you, right? At least they know what are the legal redressals and mechanisms to tackling these issues. And maybe at some point in time, they might start earning money on their own, living separately from the husband whatsoever. So I think that's really important, to build policies which are sustainable in nature, because otherwise it won't work. Like, it will be a very short-term formula kind of a thing. So I think sustainability is really key, to have that sort of systematic planning and say that, okay, in the next 5 years, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we'll assess it and look it back, right? And to have that sort of system that allows you to include feedback and to, to have ways to change those, looking at current demands and situations, right? I think that's really key in any sort of policy that you make, to make it sustainable and adaptable at the same time looking at current situations and also reflecting back on them, right? And seeing from how far you've come, I mean, and how you can change it to make it more effective and more transparent in that sense. Because I think transparency and accountability is one major challenge that we see, because you know that it's important, you know that you need to build systems and stakeholders that are accountable. But I mean, we all know how accountable our representatives are. We know where they are, right? So I don't need to really tell you where we're sort of heading, right? I think that's mostly it. Like, I don't want to throw too much jargons on you and like kind of complicate matters, but yeah, I think those are the 5 key takeaways that I always keep in mind, and I try to ensure people know when we're talking about policy and sort of building a very inclusive and fairer policy in that sense, right? Because fairness comes from these ideas, right? Fairness comes from building a space that allows you equal access to opportunities and at the same time equal representation, and fairness is always prevailing in any system, democracy, non-democracy, whatsoever. The second thing that I'd like to talk about is about structural violence, because that's what I was asked to talk about. And I think the best person that comes into my mind, which I think most of you should check out, is called John Dalton, who's like the father of peace studies, who sort of founded these concepts way back in 80s and 90s on peace, structural violence and stuff. I think you should definitely refer to him to get a more detailed understanding of these concepts. So structural violence would kind of break down into social structures that don't allow people to meet their full potential, right? It doesn't, because those systems are as such that you don't really have access to them, right? And it can cause you harm. Like, why you're not able to access a certain institution is because you're put at a disadvantage. Society places you at that disadvantage, right? You don't choose to be disadvantaged, but probably you are born in that category, or probably you are in a certain situation that makes you at a disadvantage, right? Nobody chooses to be vulnerable, right? I mean, situations and circumstances make you vulnerable. So under that, there are 2 larger concepts. One is called structural harm, which talks about structures or institutions that cause these harms, right? The other are structural barriers, which sort of are like in the midway, that don't allow you to access certain institutions or and make you more vulnerable to violence. And as I said before, right, like violence is bound to happen in any society. I mean, what is peace, right? Absence of war. I mean, we are living in societies which are bound to be violent in nature. And we are in societies where people are always on the move, right? Where you are having communities, like from the day we started out our human civilization, we're always on the move. We're moving from one place to another and migrating, whether it's for jobs, for education, for whatsoever reasons, for war, due to whatever political turmoil in your country. So I think these 2 factors make it even more complex, because you might not choose to be vulnerable, but you become vulnerable over time, right? Like, I mean, for example, people from Afghanistan, right? I don't think they chose to be vulnerable, but they became vulnerable, right? Even people in India, right? Like the poor communities. I mean, nobody, I mean, they didn't choose to be poor, right? They became poor because of their political, economic situations where they are sort of placed in, right? I mean, they can move up the hierarchy, but look at the amount of time they will take to move up in that hierarchy, even though you have reservations in place, even though you have, options that they have. But even then, if you look at institutions, even if they get access to those institutions, you see the amount of discrimination that they face, right? Like, you see the amount of negativity that they are in. So even then they are at a disadvantage. You know that people with privilege and power will be able to access those institutions better, right? I mean, how many of us know about, let's say, somebody from a marginalized or Dalit community going to Oxford or in Harvard, right? You barely, maybe 1 or 2, and that too also struggling through that process and trying to get funds and scholarships and whatnot, which is very difficult, right? So as much as you want to access institutions, so a lot of them happen by the nature of things that you are in. So you might have the potential, you might have the caliber in you, but at the same time, you might not be able to access them. And that's the bigger challenge that people like me try to address, to break those barriers, to break those sort of complex systems, which is definitely not easy. Trust me, every day I have very difficult conversations with people, and it sometimes takes a toll on you. You try to mentally place yourself and say that, okay, I need to fix this problem. That's it. But it really, really takes a toll sometimes. somebody asked me a question: how important is it to create social change and change in the mindset when trying to tackle structural violence? I think that's the question. So yes, it is definitely important, because social change is basis, right? That's the sort of larger premise, because that's the larger process involved, right? So, and it's not easy. Changing mindsets takes years and generations, right? But you have to start somewhere. You have to put a pin to it and say that, okay, this is where we start. Otherwise, where will you end, right? And it'll just make it worse, and things will just keep on going on and on and on. So I think it is important, definitely, and that's kind of starting point. I mean, why does violence happen? Why do conflicts happen? Because there's a fundamental difference, right? There's a fundamental reason for the conflict, whether it is power, money, property, whatsoever, right? If you look at interpersonal conflicts, like if a conflict with a friend or like somebody in your family, it roots to something, right? And if it's a nationwide thing, like, you know, whatever, India, Pakistan, whatever conflict, there is a basis to it. And that does have to do with the mindset and the sort of larger perception that you build around that. So definitely that is there, because if you look at structural violence, it is the unjust use of power, right? It is based on power and privilege that certain people have, and it is sort of not so visible. Like, it is not so easily evident in that sense. Like, you might know that, okay, these communities are vulnerable, but you don't understand that structural violence, because it's so deeply rooted in our societies. It is so deeply entrenched that you don't probably know, or you don't probably understand, unless you get into the depth of that and understand and assess, okay, this is precisely the root cause of the problem that we're looking at. So I think that's where I'd like to stop, because I feel like structural violence is bound to happen in our societies. So we can find solutions to tackle it in terms of specifics, like, you know, dealing with marginalized, vulnerables, whatever, XYZ communities, gender, etc. But you can't get rid of it. You can't say no, that we'll completely end violence and everything will be perfect and free and fair and equals, because that's never happened in the past. Look at history, right? I mean, have we ever seen any country or any society that is perfect in that sense, right? No country would be. I mean, Bhutan is supposed to be the happiest country in the world, right? If you look at the happiness index, whatever that thing is called. But I mean, you look at this landlocked situation of that country, right? You look at how they are located, and they're always depending on other countries to access resources and whatsoever, right? And fair, like, it's a beautiful country to be in, and I would love to go and visit it at some point in time. But I mean, they do have challenges, right? Because a landlocked country. So I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, how are we defining that happiness? Is it in terms of people having jobs? Is it in terms of education? Is it in terms of healthcare systems? And because it's a smaller country, I think it's easier to, you know, solve issues and challenges that countries like that face, or even Scandinavian countries for that matter, right? Norway, Germany, Oslo, Sweden, etc. They're supposed to be the best countries in terms of healthcare facilities and education facilities. And I mean, most of us would have seen in the news how they tackled COVID also pretty quickly, right? Again, because smaller population, stronger systems at place. But I mean, I don't know if those models can be in a country like India. You can take inspiration from them, but I really highly doubt, because you need to contextualize it according to our situation and needs, right? So I think that's about it. I mean, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. But I think the biggest key takeaway I have is to build a fairer society. You need to be more inclusive, and at the same time look at the root cause of that problem, because otherwise you won't be able to find that solution. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your views and incredible insight. And I certainly do think that you've concluded our panel session by leaving us with a lot of inspiration and with a lot to think about. And your personal and professional insights are surely going to be a great help to our participants to understand the gravity of the status quo. Now, I would like to open the floor for Q&A. For the Q&A round, I'd like to take up some questions for the panelists. I have been receiving some questions on private chat, so I'll take that up first. For Arpit sir, I received a question which says that you talked about the need of upskilling and adapting in a world where reality is constantly changing. What is the one habit or mindset that helped you the most in your career?
Sure, I think that's a great question. Well, the one habit or the mindset that has helped me so far is when you're learning something, then learn things that would be useful for you. But then when you're starting the process of learning, do not think so much about the outcomes. I remember, when I was, just give me a second. I didn't realize that my video is off. Okay, I'm somehow failing to open my video over here. But anyway, I'll continue answering the question. I remember that when I was in undergrad history, I took up a paper on the history of the USSR. And at that point of time, I was just quite fascinated by how the whole of the Russian Revolution took place. And I was really not reading it up for the exams. I was really reading it so that I can understand the thing very well. And I remember that in one of the term prelim exams, the 3-hour, there used to be a 3-hour exam and you had to answer about 4 questions over there. And I was just so engrossed with answering this one question about the causes of the, Soviet Revolution, that I only spent my 3 hours answering that one question. So I was not really interested in getting the scores, getting the marks, but I was just interested in understanding the subject at hand. And that is super, super important, that when you're learning, don't learn it for the exam or don't learn it for a particular outcome. Just engross yourself absolutely and completely in that particular subject for the sake of understanding it, for the sake of really getting a hold on that. And that applies to skills, that applies to everything, which also means that you'll only be willing to invest in learning in the subjects or in the issues that you're really passionate and interested about.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. We have a question for Tarana ma'am as well. So we're talking about how the government, I think one of the participants is talking about how we have data-driven policies. We're talking about manual scavenging in India, and how the government has asserted that even though that on international and national platforms that manual scavenging does not exist in India, when all of these problems are brushed under the carpet, then how do we as policymakers go on acquiring data and doing scientific research behind them?
It's an interesting question, because not just manual scavenging, but even very grave challenges like open defecation and sanitation, etc., are put under the carpet, right? Like under your Swachh Bharat Abhiyan and all those government initiatives, people say that, okay, we are free from all these issues. So I would say that in such a situation, I think the best way to go about is to get into the depths of it, like go to the field, talk to people, talk to communities, talk to groups, talk to people who are in these professions, because we know that manual scavenging still is a big problem in India. And it also a lot of times boils down to caste. It boils down to the castes or the systems in which they are placed at, right? Typically they would belong to lower caste communities or are at the peripheries of the caste system. So I think, and even gender for that matter, right? Like typically you would see young men being manual scavengers. You would not easily see women, but you'll see women as waste pickers, perhaps. You will see women, going door to door collecting waste. So I think a lot has to do with caste. So I think the best way to do that is to talk to those communities, interact with them, and at the same time look at pre-existing data, right? Like I'm sure there's abundant amount of data and information that is available on these topics, and to talk to experts on these issues. I think that would be the best solution in my hands that I can probably recommend. And I think there is, this is one of the things. There are lots of policies and lots of problems that are sort of hidden under the carpet, right? Due to political interests or vested interests or whatsoever interests that beneficiaries have. So I think the best way is to kind of get as much information as you can, and then try to identify challenges and how you can probably tackle these kind of challenges. So definitely I think caste and gender are two lenses through which you can look at manual scavenging. I know, for example, a friend of mine did his PhD thesis on manual scavenging in I think in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, because that's where I think this problem was a big issue. And it was difficult to get that data, right? But there are lots of these groups and communities and local grassroots civil society initiatives that are working around those issues. So I mean, you have to spend months and months collecting that data and interacting with communities, doing community participation, interactions, etc. I think that would be the best way forward.
Thank you, ma'am. We have a lot more questions, but unfortunately, we're running a little short on time right now. So we'll certainly forward these questions to you later on. So if people would like to reach out to you, maybe we can do that. Now, I would like to conclude our Q&A round for now. I know we have a lot of questions that are pending, and we'll take that up post this session because we have a lot more to do right now. So for now, I would like to invite Mr. Arpit Chaturvedi once again to come again and speak to our participants about policy writing techniques. And post this, we will be moving on into the workshop phase.
Perfect. So here is what I want to talk about policy writing fundamentally, and then I will probably quickly share my screen and show you, some very basic, foundational principles of effective policy writing. So whenever you're writing a policy, just note down these 4 letters, an acronym. And again, this is coming from the same systems thinking professors. They also teach an organizational design course, but then I also apply this methodology to policy making. The 4 letters you need to write down is VMCL, which is a vision, a mission, capacity, and learning. Each public policy needs to have these 4 components. And what I mean about that is that first thing is the vision, that what do you really want to achieve? Okay, what does success look like? And most of the effective policies that you see, which are implemented on the ground, they have a very clear sense of what the vision is, what does success look like? How can you even measure it? How will you know that, okay, now we are in a world where we see success, where we have achieved the outcomes of this policy? So vision, very clear. Okay, that's the end state that you need to be in. The second is mission. So what are the things that you will do over and over and over again to achieve that vision? Okay, so what are the actual, operational functional parts of the policies? What are the, behaviors? What are the actions? What are the things that you will do to get a policy in place? The third is capacity, which is that to do your mission, what capacities do you need? What sort of human resources? What sort of finances? What sort of technology? What sort of other resources you need to be able to do your mission? Okay. And the final is learning, that how will you adapt to reality? How will you keep adapting all of your, things that you're doing, all of your mission components, all of your capacity components, so that you can achieve your vision in a constantly changing world. So how do you monitor your policy? How do you, evaluate your policy on a constant basis? And how do you figure out the outcomes and redesign the policies to achieve the vision? So these are the 4 components of, every effective public policy. Okay. Now, if I am allowed to share my screen real quick, I would like to show you 12 very simple rules of effective policy writing. And I think the host would have to allow me to share my screen for that.
Shwantaka, can you please give our bits of strengths?
Okay, let me try again now. Nope. Okay, now, no. Okay. Maybe I'll just read it out.
Just 1 second, sir.
I think you need to have sharing rights, no? Like.
Yeah, that's right.
We'll be sharing.
Or you might want to make me the co-host.
Yes, we're trying to. Abhishek, since you're the host.
Sir, I've made you the co-host.
All right. Thank you so much, Abhishek. Yes. Can do that right now. Okay. So quickly, I'm going to talk about these 12 sinister, cynical, and effective rules of policy writing. And I think, Tarana has been through that because Tarana has worked with me earlier. So this is what we use when we evaluate articles. That, and typically that's how we train our writers in our organization. And the first thing that you need to look at is that start with the why. That why are you writing? Why what you're talking about is important, and why should anybody spend their time just reading what you've written about? So if you're writing about the issue of skill development in India, then explain in a few words that why is it important? Why should anybody care? Okay. The second is that answer who the fuck are you, which essentially means that if you're a new writer, then explain in your byline that why do you have any credibility in talking about that particular issue. And you don't have to be the chairperson or the secretary of something. Even if you are able to explain that, okay, you have some authority or you have been through that system, even as a victim of that system, it gives you credibility for you to write about that particular topic. If you're a new writer, follow the 80-20 rule, which means that 80% of the time talk about data, facts, logical arguments. 20% of the time give your opinion. Okay, as you become more known and formidable and successful as a writer, that's the time when you can start just giving more of your opinion, because it'll be assumed that all of your opinion is based on facts, data, rational arguments, etc. But initially you'll have to show them in a more obvious manner. Okay, now when you're writing, think about that one reader that matters. So when you're writing, write for just one person. Okay, but when you're editing, edit for the world at large. So when you're writing a piece on education and how should education change in India, think about who you are writing for. Are you writing for, let's say, Yashiba in front of you, who's your friend? Or are you writing for the Secretary of Education? Whom is this article or this memo addressed to? The third is kill your darlings. Okay, what I mean by that is that in front of me. Hi.
I think Apitsa, we aren't able to hear you right now. Just give us a second. We'll wait for Sir's network to stabilize.
I'm so sorry, guys. Bad internet this side. I thought we were having a fascinating conversation. So what was the last thing that you were able to hear that I was saying?
It was about point 4, kill your darlings. We just begun talking about.
Okay, perfect. Yes. So what that essentially means is that you don't really kill your darlings. What that essentially means is that whenever we are writing, sometimes we use, rhetorical questions. Sometimes we use, really, flowery language, such as, starting with phrases like the pen is mightier than the sword and things like that. Don't use them at all. And a lot of times we get attached to particular pieces of our writing, particular, sentences in a paragraph that an editor might tell you that this needs to go, or somebody else might tell you that this needs to go. And we don't really, we become attached to that. And I think a lot of times you need to know how to kill your darlings, because, even if it pains your little writer's heart, think of the reader. And, sometimes you have to get rid of things if that helps the reader. So only keep the essential bits in. The thing is, then the next point is, go down the rabbit hole. And what I mean by that is that, I see a lot of articles which are just talking in platitudes, which are just talking about, how, for example, let's say if you need more budgets for health expenditure. So a lot of articles would say that, you know what, just take those budgets from the defense, just take those budgets from military and give it to its health. Now, that's not a great argument, because you need to go down the rabbit hole and you need to explain that, okay, if you take budgets out from the defense, then what will be the complexities of that? Will you eventually, lose out on the balance of power? Would that have effects on, your national security? If it has national security effects, will that have any negative effects on your economy and therefore your ability to fund healthcare in the long run? You need to think about all of that. Then a lot of times I see recommendations such as, you need to improve the processes. For example, I was going through an article which talked about how do you, the need to reduce pendency rates in courts. And the answer over there was that, just revamp your processes and, the pendency in the courts would come down. The real question is that, after reading and probably rejecting that article, when I wrote an article about how pendency at the National Commission for Minorities should go down, I literally gave them a rough process sheet, which, talked about, okay, this is how the process should change. So which means that go down the rabbit hole, go deep into the details. You don't just say that, you need to change the process or you need to do that. Show exactly how. Show, not tell. Okay. Then don't save the best for the last. What I mean by that is bring your best arguments first. Bring your, a lot of times we have this compulsion of, making it almost like a play, like a the denouement, where the big a problem that you're dealing with and a recommendation that you will eventually make. Tell them in the first paragraph that this is the recommendation I'm going to make. The rest of the paragraphs can argue why that recommendation is a good one, or what are the various other recommendations. So get your best arguments in the front, and that also means that, okay, we'll come to the other one is create. It is good. Okay, again, I think my internet is lost.
Yes, some of your words.
Okay, am I audible again?
Yes, now you're audible.
Perfect. Let me just stop my video so that it doesn't break down again. Okay. Next one is create a chain of arguments. Don't break that chain. And what I mean by that is that it is good to think in non-linear terms. So don't think in linear terms, but it is absolutely necessary to write linearly. So which means that, when you're thinking, don't be linear. When you're writing, be absolutely linear. So each paragraph should have a chain of argument. So one sentence should flow from another. And similarly, each paragraph should flow from another in a particular article. So be very linear when you're writing, not linear when you're thinking, but linear when you're writing. Okay. The other is play the devil's advocate. Answer, questions such as, is your argument really right? Will your argument really work? Challenge your own arguments when you're writing. Don't get wedded to your own recommendations. So challenge it in terms of, its feasibility, its desirability, and, all of the other parameters, which also means that defend proactively. Think of what will be the best argument of the person who will oppose your recommendation. Okay. And address those objections beforehand in your article. And what I mean by that is that over there, some people make a mistake, and a deliberate one is that they will pick up the other side's weakest argument and they will break that argument down and they will defend based on the other side's weakest argument. No, pick up the other side's strongest argument and attack that. Okay, that's the respectable thing to do over here. The next one is, promise value in your tagline, which essentially means that, don't have a tagline such as, I edited an article which had a tagline called water and peace. Now, you don't really understand what that really means. Does it mean, it has something to say about water conflicts, but it's a play on the, book by Tolstoy, War and Peace. But you don't know that whether this person is talking about water conflicts in India or, what sort of water conflicts, etc., etc. So it's really important to promise value in your tagline. And then it's important to trust your editor because, it's just another pair of eyes. And editors are typically trained in figuring out what the readers will actually get. So don't get too wedded to what you've written. You need to trust the editor because they have the virtue of not being you, first of all. And finally, it's important to make your baby walk, which means that a done article is not a published article. A done article is when you've sent it to at least 4 or 5 relevant people who would be impacted or who can do something about what you're talking about, what policies you're recommending. So typically our practice is that any article that we publish, we send it to 5 relevant agencies. It could be think tanks, it could be government agencies, it could be civil society organizations, but 5 places which would really, really, derive some value after reading this article. So you need to make your baby walk. I think these are the 12 rules of effective policy writing. Today, the exercise that you will have is to write effective policy memos. And effective policy memos are a particular form of policy writing, wherein you're not really summarizing policy. Memos are persuasive, and you'll get a format to write memos. Memos are going to be persuasive, which means that you will be arguing for a particular public policy to take place. And the thing about memos is that they don't go more than 2 pages and they have a particular format. They are not written in extensive sentences and paragraphs. They are mostly divided in subheadings and headings and subheadings and bullet points. And typically in a memo, the way to test whether a memo is a good one or not is, you must always imagine that if you're writing a memo first, it needs to be persuasive. So let's say, if you don't have any topic to write about, my typical topic that I give to people is write about why India should have a ministry for the elderly. Because, data says that by 2050, you will have 20% of the Indian population in the senior citizen bracket. And right now, 8.5% population is in the senior citizen bracket. Later on, it'll be 20%. So when a fifth of your population is in the senior citizen bracket and there is no ministry to deal with that, you have a ministry for youth affairs, you don't have a ministry for elderly. And when you have 1/5 of the population in that bracket, it'll mean a lot of things for economy, for the way that we've designed our cities, for the way that we do housing design, from the way that we design our jobs. If you watch the movie Intern, Robert De Niro, you'd have seen that how even the elderly people, they have a great sense of dignity and a great sense of being able to contribute towards a society. So if a fifth of your population is elderly, you need to do that, but you need to do that right now and not in 2050 when your population of the elderly is already 20%. So you need to write a policy memo either on this topic or any topic of your choice where you are persuading somebody to come up with a policy. Okay. And the test of, the proof of the pudding is that when you have a policy memo, imagine that you've given that policy memo to a policy maker, and that policy maker is, rushing from her or his office towards a conference room, which is about 100 meters from this person. And while walking to that meeting in that conference room, this person should be able to read the memo and absorb all of the data and all of the things that you've talked about in the memo. So essentially, you need to make it so readable, so easily readable, that even if I'm walking and reading the memo and I'm in a hurry, I should be able to understand each of your arguments very well. So that's broadly the idea behind writing a policy memo. It is very different from just summarizing a policy. It is very different from, analyzing a policy. It is essentially advocating for a particular policy change. And that's the exercise that we have given you today. And I hope you'll enjoy writing it. It's a very fairly simple template, which your team would have shared with you. Make sure that you will be judged on the memo on the following things. Number one is the format. Have you numbered the pages? Have you written memorandum on the top? Have you written the subject line, etc.? Number two is going to be readability. Can I read it while walking 100 meters quickly and absorb all of the facts? Number three is going to be your arguments. So, we have given you a space to not just argue about that one recommendation. So not just argue about, let's say, creating a ministry for the elderly, but also to argue what could be the other alternatives and why this alternative is better than the others. So, we are going to judge you on how well your overall argument is. Have you defended proactively? Have you figured out what would be the objections? Have you figured out how will you go down the rabbit hole to build capacity? So your quality of arguments is going to be the thing that we are going to evaluate you on. And the fourth thing would be the kind of evidences that you've mustered, the data that you've used to support your arguments. So these are the four things that we're going to use to evaluate your pieces. So that's about it from my side. And back to you, Yashoda.
Thank you so much, sir. I'm sure this is a very fun way of explaining the exercise that's ahead. Before we move into the breakout rooms, we'll now be sending all the teams into their respective breakout rooms. You will have one team moderator present with you at all times during your discussion. The discussion that you're going to have right now in the time bracket that we have given you is the preliminary discussion. So you can discuss the policy memo with your team, but the drafting process will also take place post this meeting ends as well. So you can work on the drafting part at the end, even after this ends, like throughout the day. And then tomorrow, as we specified, you will have to be presenting it. Before we move into the breakout rooms, I'll just reiterate the rules once again for the participants. So first, the participants must adhere to policy focus areas specified in the theme that has been allocated to you by AO India. And you must research and address each subpoint within the policy focus if possible. And participants can only draft their policies on the policy memo template provided to you by AO India. Arpit sir has also reiterated it when he was talking about it. The memo is fairly simple to follow. So in case you still have queries with understanding the memorandum, feel free to reach out to the moderators that are present and assigned to your teams. The policy memo should be no more than 2 pages. The font size has been specified. It's 11 times New Roman with paragraph spacing of 1.15. And you are supposed to follow the rules very, very carefully, because otherwise you might face deduction in your scores. And participants must submit your memos by 7 p.m. tomorrow. So any document that is submitted post that will not be considered. And then this is the most important point. Whatever you're discussing and whatever you're drafting, the policies must be original. Each team document will undergo a plagiarism check. If more than 10% of the policy memo material is found to be plagiarized, the team shall be disqualified upon discovery and notified upon the same. The judging criteria has already been cleared by Arpit sir. So I will move on to specify that any misbehavior or derogatory comments made towards a person's race, gender, caste, sex, class, or sexual preference during the discussions or during the duration of this workshop will not be accepted and will result in immediate disqualification. And as we've specified, the conclusion of this workshop, which means that the team that receives the highest scores shall be deemed the winner, and their memo shall be published on the IAPSS website. And only the scores of the top 3 contending teams will be revealed. I hope that the rules are clear. If you want to have a more specific look at the rules, you can also refer to the rule document that we've sent to you on the group. We will now be moving into the breakout rooms. Participants, I request you, people who have not named themselves yet, according to the team numbers, please rename yourself so your assigned moderators can find you and assign you to your rooms. Thank you so much to our speakers for joining us, and we look forward to the discussion and the engagement that we're going to have ahead. You feel free to you can, if you've prior commitments, you can you can join us tomorrow straight away, or if you want to stick around and maybe look at the discourse of what the participants are doing, you're also free to look into the discussion that are happening in the breakout rooms. The choice is totally up to you, and we totally respect your time constraints accordingly.
Thank you so much, Yashiba. I think I have another 6 minutes before I jump into the next meeting, so I'll probably quickly check out a few of the breakout rooms and what's happening over there. Yashiba, just one more thing. Cheena will be one of the evaluators for the memo, so I don't know if you have her contact directly, but then I just want to make sure that there's no confusion on the exact time when she has to be here.
Yes, sir. We will be sending out a specific email to Cheena ma'am as well. I'm aware that she'll be joining us tomorrow for the judging process as well. So we'll be
perfect. All right. Well, I'm just going to hop on to one of the breakout rooms, spend a couple minutes there, and then I will see you guys later. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn or just find me wherever you can. Abhishek has my contact details, and you can get those from him as well.
Yes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Arpit sir.
Thanks a lot, Abhishek. Thanks, Yashiba.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Hello, can I please be added to breakout room 4? Ashish, there is some technical difficulty. We'll just be adding you to your breakout room shortly.
Anis, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Which team are you in?
I actually private message asking because my name is not on any team.
Okay, wait, I'll just check with the team.
All right.
Anis, please go to breakout room number 5.
Shivantika, can you hear me? Shivantika?